This is a compilation of all of the major factions from Fallout New Vegas, as well as some of the minor ones who play a little role in the story and the way the world works within 2281. Obviously, with Season 2 of Fallout now out, a lot of these factions will have updates to their lore and what they're up to now, but that's something we will explore after the season has fully released. The Brotherhood still also has a ton of lore from all of the other games, but they won't be a focus in this video. Instead, only the Mojave chapter will be talked about, because technically they are far removed from the main Brotherhood of Steel chapter and have their own little story going on. So let's not make this a long intro. Let's dive into the factions of New Vegas and how they got to where they are now in 2281, going into the 2290s. Before the Great War of 2077, Vault-Tec, along with the shadow government known to some as the Enclave, had begun setting up vaults, nuclear bunkers that would help protect the civilians of America from the nuclear bombs that would be inevitable as the war with China got worse. However, they had a darker objective as well. All of the vaults were set up to be used as experiments for those who went in, some having drugs pumped into the airways to see how the civilians reacted, some being populated with 1,000 women and 1 man, and even one that had a population of 1 man and a box of puppets to see what he did, causing him to lose his mind and go on a killing spree out in the wasteland. The vaults were deadly places, and one in particular was the start of the NCR's journey. Vault 15 was one of the few vaults whose construction went smoothly and without delays. The experiment that Vault-Tec wanted to conduct here was to put people who had radically diverse ideologies and cultures together to see how they got along in a confined space, monitoring their interactions and to see if they could last over the 50 years they were sealed away for. Sealed away from all other contact after the bombs eventually fell, it wasn't until around the year of 2141 until the Vault Dwellers were able to venture out into the world once again. Once the doors opened, most of the Dwellers marched out, stripping the Vault of its resources, all of its equipment, and anything they could use to survive. This included the Garden of Eden Creation Kit, a terraforming device that could be used to create green land once again. Some Dwellers, however, remained within the now barren Vault, unwilling to embrace the new world. The Vault Dwellers who left, however, were some of the most violent and fierce individuals within the Wasteland. As they left with all of their resources, they would form into some of the most feared tribes within the Wasteland. These Dwellers set up into the Khans, the Jackals, and the Vipers, who would go out into the Wasteland and take anything they wanted by force, and would continue to do so for over 2 decades. There was one last group, however, who did not form into a tribal faction like the others, and instead set themselves up within a town called Shady Sands, which was created thanks to the Gek. Within this town lived a man named Aradesh, with his daughter Tandy. Aradesh was an extremely cautious man who always wanted to protect Tandy and would keep her close at all times. However, Tandy wasn't like that and instead was extremely lively and strong-willed. Bored with how simple and easy life was in Shady Sands, Tandy wanted more and would find that very quickly. Minding her own business, Tandy would be captured by a group of Khan members and would be held for ransom. Thinking that this was the end, Tandy would be saved by a mysterious individual known only as the Vault Dweller. This had a lasting impact on Tandy and helped her to see life in a different way. After this encounter with the Khans, Shady Sands was able to live in a period of peace as the Vault Dweller had scared the raiders away from it, allowing the population to have a wide berth away from any raiders looking for resources. This spurred on Tandy, and together with her father used this opportunity to develop the land that they had. Trade routes were set up within New California and Shady Sands began to prosper because of it. Their influence was growing and Aradesh along with Tandy had now set the foundations for something great. Junktown and the Hub now had joined the trade routes thanks to Tandy, which was massive for the town, bringing in a really strong economy. However, Aradesh was always anxious about involving themselves with these two places, but Tandy's determinedness to be bigger and better helped them achieve this. Eventually, Shady Sands dominated the Brahmin trade, and because of it, states started to form and the new California Republic was beginning to blossom, with other smaller factions such as the Brotherhood of Steel lending a hand to this rebuilding of the wasteland. It was now inevitable that political structures would form, and it was in 2186 where a nation identity movement started to gain popular acceptance. Within that year, it now became official that this group would be named the New California Republic, and all of the allies who traded and supported each other would gather under that faction name. It was here where a constitution was formed, and the ideologies of the NCR would spread throughout California, with Junktown becoming one of the first provisioned states of this faction because of its history with Shady Sands, being the oldest and most trusted trade partners. By 2189, the NCR had expanded even further, with now 5 states being voted into the society, those being Shady Sands, Los Angeles, Maxon, Hub, and Dayglow. Aradesh and Tandy had done it. Their Gek-created town had now branched out, and Tandy's goal of doing something great to rebuild the country had led to the formation of this vast society called the New California Republic. People were safe, they had their own economy, they had trade routes which could give them food, water, and other necessary supplies, and they could all live securely away from the brutal tribes such as the Khans. It was the start of something great, and it was only going to get better for Tandy going forward. With the NCR now in full swing with its 5 states and its economy growing, the population made it so that Aradesh was now the first president, a fitting tribute to the man who started everything with his small Gek-created town. Tandy was extremely proud of this as they continued to build their republic even further. However, Aradesh wanted to try something. He was inspired by their Vault Dweller legacy, and along with the NCR's first ranger Seth, they ventured out to explore Vault 13. However, as they ventured into it, the two would disappear, never return, would be presumed dead. By 2196, the NCR's first president had now been declared dead. They were now leaderless, and Tandy had now lost her loving father. With Aradesh gone, it was only right that Tandy took over the role of president of the NCR, as she was the co-creator of it alongside her father. It was she who made the most changes on the setup of Shady Sands and helped the NCR prosper. She was the perfect leader, and in fact would be the best thing to happen to the NCR moving forward. Along with Congress, Tandy looked to expand the state to make sure that peace and stability was fundamental for the wasteland. That was the priority, to make sure the citizens of the land could live peacefully without worry of the brutal nature of the post-war world. Here Tandy wanted to forge a deal with New Reno and buy Vault City, merging them into the NCR and helping supply them with the NCR's far superior medical technology. However, this did not work, and New Reno along with Vault City became rivals to the NCR, with them believing the NCR was trying to take over everything for their own gains, which, they're not wrong. Alongside that, other factions also opposed the NCR's peaceful expansion, with Vault 15 acting as a proving ground. Tension grew higher between all of the powerful factions as their attention drew towards the town of Redding, who was the primary supplier of gold ore, for whoever controlled the supply of gold controlled the currency throughout the whole of New California. However, Redding was too far away for any of them to forge a military takeover. It would just be too expensive for any force. And things got worse going into 2241 as factions upped their efforts to control Redding and get the gold ore supply links for themselves. The Mordino family, who were a power family within New Reno, tried to control the town through the drug market, pumping tons of jet into the town to try and get that market to take over and for them to move it. The Bishop family, also from New Reno, also tried to force Vault City into a partnership but was later rejected, and then with the NCR tried to arm mercenaries to attack the city to almost bully the city into joining the NCR. But on top of all of that, North California was also experiencing the worst dry seasons in years, causing widespread food shortages in such places as Arroyo and Modoc, known for being some of the more poor, less developed areas within California. Using these events to their advantage, the NCR would step up their efforts and their campaign would see them expand into the hungry and ruined New Arroyo, as well as Redding and Vault City, meaning that the NCR controlled the currency of California and was also one of the largest factions in the state, and anyone who went against them would be vastly outnumbered by their society. They also had very influential friends in high places, with some of the wealthiest families within New Reno endorsing everything the NCR did and helped them with this expansion to help line their own pockets or gain influence out within the wider wasteland. But the NCR didn't stop there, and in fact turned their efforts towards attacking the faction known as the Enclave. In 2241, the Enclave oil rig was targeted by a new mysterious lone wanderer called the Chosen One, who had uncovered their plans to cleanse the world from mutations caused by nuclear radiation. After finding out they were behind everything from the Vaults, the super mutants to the Great War, and the plan after, the Chosen One blew up the oil rig, ruining the Enclave's plans and killing their president in the process. After that, the Chosen One would venture off into the wasteland to never be seen again, as they would leave the oil rig, also known as Navarro, to be a shadow of its former self, with some of the Enclave personnel still residing in it. The NCR would watch this happen and in 2246 would venture into the remnants of Navarro, stating it still posed a threat to the region. The NCR army would then go on to wipe out all of the Enclave remnants within this place. The Enclave personnel would either be killed, tried for war crimes or would escape the area and scatter across the west coast, leaving them to be targets to pretty much all of the factions that opposed the Enclave. The NCR were able to strip the base of all of its technology, weapon caches, and numerous vertibirds, allowing the NCR to be equipped with some of the best technology within the land. In just 50 years, the new California Republic had dominated the land, had forced cities into joining its republic, had taken the best equipment for themselves, taken small underdeveloped towns that needed food and resources, and on top of all that had full control of the currency of the land. Tandy's so-called peaceful expansion had worked, and the NCR had now officially become the most dominant force in the whole of California, overwhelming all of the tribes, the Enclave, the Brotherhood of Steel, as well as all of the other traders throughout the lands. However, the year was now 2248, and President Tandy at the age of 103 would finally meet her end. Dying to an unnamed illness, her 52-year presidency had been unchallenged in that time, and now it had officially come to an end. Her legacy lives on through the NCR faction, with the people of the NCR still seeing her as the most popular president to date. But it was now time for a change. This would lead to a lot of turmoil down the line as other factions started to rise up and challenge the leadership of this faction, who they deemed as overwhelming and sometimes very corrupt. It was here where Joanna Tibbet, the vice president at the time, took the role of president and tried to continue the world set up by Tandy. Tibbet, however, was nothing like Tandy and in fact did nothing within office, despite being re-elected in 2251. It was 2 years later where Tibbet was ejected from the office, with everyone branding her as timid as she refused to act after 38 NCR citizens were murdered by raiders in the Mojave wasteland. In 2253, Tibbet was out and a new president was elected, that being Wendell Peterson. It was here where the NCR's policies and societal changes started to take place. Thanks to President Tandy, citizens under the NCR had it pretty comfortable. Throughout all of their rule, they had granted the luxuries of a steady economy, healthcare, laws, and a legitimate government, as well as well-armed military to keep them safe from outsiders who wished to cause them harm. Life was pretty nice for the 700,000 citizens living within the NCR areas. Alongside that, it was an extremely diverse society. People from all walks of life would live together. Ghouls were welcome into cities. People who had different religious views were allowed to gather as long as they didn't incite violence. It was a pleasant place to live to some extent. However, because of this new economic powerhouse the NCR had turned itself into after 2241, survivalists weren't really a thing, and community focus went out of the window and turned more into individual prosperity. Instead of groups of people going out to look for resources to benefit the community, individuals would sell their trade to others. Businesses would supply items, economy-focused living became the focus, and more of a me versus everyone else way of looking at things became more dominant compared to the way the tribes lived. This was also not helped by Wendell Peterson, who in 2269 changed some of the laws of the Tandy administration, removing the limit of Brahmin cattle per person, meaning there was an incredible rise of Brahmin and agricultural barons, meaning there was more corruption within the NCR ranks over the Brahmin industry. The wealthy started becoming more wealthy under the new president of Wendell Peterson, as the everyday workers started getting poorer. Everything Tandy had set up was causing individuals within the NCR society to become more greedy and less about community, going against everything they had set up in the first place, realistically was inevitably going to happen regardless. There was also a small issue in terms of population. By 2241, the population of the NCR territory was said to be around 700,000 citizens living within sprawling urban areas. Because of this, the NCR higher-ups decided it could have some of the best manpower in the wasteland, so conscription was introduced, meaning that if you were a young adult man or woman, you could be conscripted at a moment's notice, meaning you had to fight under the flag. Whilst a lot probably like this and would do this without even thinking about it, for a lot, I'd imagine, it was not a nice thought. The large population would also lead to problems in terms of food later on down the line due to the sheer amount they would have to bring in to feed the masses. Ultimately, the NCR is like any modern society. It has a large population, it has a dependence on business and individuals wanting to succeed in life, and prides itself on its military to keep its territory safe. They have strict laws such as anti-slavery, no prejudice amongst people with different religious views, sexuality, race, or even if they are mutated with some super mutants even being allowed within their military ranks. Immigration is widely accepted for anyone wanting to live in their societies. However, they do have to abide by the laws of the land, and anyone wanting to live under NCR rule will have to accept that they could be conscripted to the army at any time and will have to pay any appropriate taxes. Most of the citizens, however, love living under the security of the NCR in a world that feels very familiar to the one before. 1974. However, the NCR's constant expansion and its focus on individual prosperity, leading to some pretty corrupt individuals and families at the top, would lead to other factions despising their presence within California. This would lead to a ton of conflicts starting from 2241 and lasting for as long as some can remember. The Enclave NCR was the first and was one of the easiest for the NCR, as they just cleared out the stragglers and took their resources. However, at the same time, the NCR was faced with the backlash from their once allies, the Brotherhood of Steel. The Brotherhood didn't like how quickly the NCR were expanding and their control of the overall currency. The Brotherhood really lost a lot of power and blamed it massively on the NCR, especially as their military started to grow at a rapid pace. It was also because they had an ongoing disagreements related to how technology should be used within the wasteland. After a while, the two factions clashed together, leading to a long and bloody war that used up a lot of men and resources for both sides. Alongside that, a lot of the tribes still hated the NCR because of their past and just seeing how much land and wealth they had. This led to skirmishes with the Vipers, the Jackals, and other raider tribes such as the Great Khans, which led to a very dark moment in the NCR's history that we will explore in the Great Khan section. Regardless, this event affected many of the NCR soldiers, including Craig Boone, who immediately retired from the NCR due to psychological reasons. Captain Dartrey, who was also at the scene, tried to salvage what had happened to the best of his ability, and because of it was promoted to Major. However, as he said many times, that was not the way he wished to be promoted. This attack caused the NCR to go down pretty negatively in people's opinions, making others question what the NCR was truly capable of if they wanted to wipe a group out, and where exactly did their expansion stop. To other factions such as the Brotherhood of Steel, this would have been even more reason to fight back against this faction, as they now had massacred innocents, not even checking their own intel on the matter. By this point, the NCR was under new leadership, with President Aaron Kimball, a decorated war hero, now successful politician. Thanks to his fights back against the tribes within the wasteland, Kimball was already seen as the hero of the Mojave by the NCR population, and going forward, it would only get better for him. In 2274, Kimball had a plan to occupy the Hoover Dam, using it to not only help power the land, but also send clean water to all of the areas of New California under the NCR rule. Here he composed a deal with Robert House of New Vegas to send his forces to the dam to hold military occupation of it. However, he would also have to accept that House was the ruler of New Vegas and nothing could change that. Both parties agreed, and almost immediately power was sent to the Strip, as well as the NCR territories, given the clean water for the people. This was bad news for one small group of Brotherhood of Steel members who were occupied within the Helios 1 power plant at the time. As the NCR troops moved into the Vegas area, Elder Elijah and his order were discovered as they launched guerrilla skirmishes against the NCR. Knowing that they were in a tight spot within the facility, it was only a matter of time before the NCR moved in to take it. Thus began the NCR's attack, named Operation Sunburst. Desperate to defend the facility, the Brotherhood defended against the waves of NCR troopers. However, it was too much for them to handle, and eventually the defenses fell and they were overrun. The Brotherhood tried their best to retreat and got out of the area eventually, but Elder Elijah completely disappeared in the midst of the battle. The Brotherhood, however, did have one victory, as they were able to activate Helios 1 Archimedes 1 security measures as a trap to the first NCR soldier to enter the primary control area. After this, however, the Brotherhood went into hiding. The NCR had too many numbers that were far superior in battle for them to handle. Throughout the Vegas area, the Brotherhood's presence was almost non-existent, as they feared the power of the NCR. President Kimball had done it. He and his order now had new alliances within New Vegas, had clean water, had power running throughout their cities, and the largest army in New California, at least for now. And whilst the Brotherhood tried desperately to take out their gold mines and ruin their economy, they were able to bring it back under control once again, and the people praised Kimball for all that he had done. Despite defeating the tribes of the Wasteland, the Brotherhood, and the Enclave, there was a new force on the horizon, one growing in numbers faster than anyone before, and would be a great threat to the NCR within the Vegas area. You see, Caesar and his legion were on their way to discover the New Vegas Strip and the Hoover Dam. The year was now 2274, and the Legion had arrived on the scene, setting up on Fortification Hill. The Legion would overlook the dam with one goal in mind: to take it over and then move into New Vegas. That would be Caesar's own personal Rome to lead from. Kimball knew of their existence since 2271 and had actually already made a pact with the Desert Rangers, a group of highly skilled warriors with some of the best armor in the Wasteland, to help them fend off any threat that might want to cause harm, be that the tribes, the Brotherhood, or the Legion. Legion. Kimball knew that war with the Legion was coming. It didn't take long until suddenly skirmishes broke out between the NCR soldiers and the Legion legionnaires. The NCR quickly realized that they were unlike those they had fought before. They were extremely well trained, had vast numbers, and were willing to kill themselves if it meant their cause would be won. Immediately after these skirmishes, Caesar ordered Malpai legates to attack the NCR forces at the Hoover Dam, leading to the first Battle of Hoover Dam. But the NCR didn't hold back and fended off the vicious attack. NCR sharpshooters took out a lot of the Legion's officers and battle-hardened veterans from afar, leading to the Legion panicking mid-attack. The NCR decided that they needed to find a way to hit the Legion hard and get them to retreat, or they would just keep sending hundreds more in a war of attrition, something the NCR used early in their battles. Here the NCR troops pretended to retreat into Boulder City in a hope that the Legion would follow. They were correct, as Malpai Legate ordered his best men to follow them, but within the city, the NCR troops had rigged it to blow. As the Legion's elite forces stormed the city, the place went up in a massive detonation, wiping out all of the attacking forces, which included their most experienced warriors. The first battle of the Hoover Dam had come to an end, but the war still continued. Still, with thousands of soldiers, Caesar kept hitting back against the NCR, destroying some of their trade links and crippling their economy. Famine and food shortages started to spread throughout the NCR territories, and war was really cutting down a lot of their population on both the Legion and the NCR's side, with some saying it loses 1,000 troopers every year. As of 2281, the war is at a stalemate, and the two societies, both with different views, yet are quite similar in terms of wanting to create a safe haven away from the threats of the wasteland, sit and wait for the other to attack. Only one person can be the defining factor in the second battle of Hoover Dam that is inevitable, and that is the mysterious courier. No matter what that individual chooses, it is clear that what the NCR had built up has been incredible. They have the largest population out of any. Their trade links provide the whole of their new California states with resources, and their steady economy allows them to create jobs and put people back into a world that is familiar to what it was pre-Great War. Are they the good guys? Are they the bad guys? That's all down to your perspective. Whilst they have a lot of good, they have also committed atrocities and have helped corrupt wealthy individuals to hold too much power in certain industries. Whatever your view is of them, it is safe to say Aradesh, Tandy, as well as Kimball's work, will go down in history, and no matter what happens in the future, the NCR's work will always be remembered by the wastelanders within New California. The year is 2246, and it has been over 130 years since the events of the Great War. Survivors on the surface have started to rebuild, and a lot of the vaults have started to open back up, allowing those who had survived the harsh experiments to see the surface once again and try to rebuild the America that was before. Before this time, however, an organization was set up called the Followers of the Apocalypse, or just simply the Followers. These were a group of ex-vault dwellers who wanted to spread the word of a past events, alerting the survivors of the wasteland to the horrors of what happened during the Great War and how America became the way it did. Their ultimate goal was to make sure that humanity didn't make the same mistakes as before and could live in a more harmonious way. Originating within Dayglow, aka what used to be San Diego within California, the followers moved around quite a bit and eventually went on to set up within the Los Angeles Public Library, making use of everything within it. During their time, they would form short alliances with anyone they could, be that the Brotherhood of Steel, the NCR, and any faction they could find, actually influencing a lot of those faction members, meaning that they would take on more individuals. The followers actually were able to grow their numbers, welcoming new recruits that were from the Brotherhood, former members of the Enclave, and again, any other faction that found what they had to say extremely interesting. After building up their members and supplies, eventually the Followers of the Apocalypse were able to send out regular scholars on expeditions to gather knowledge, including information on tribal dialects. However, sending scholars out would lead to the loss of some of their members and the formation of something new. During 2246, the Followers sent out a group to make their way towards the Grand Canyon to study the region's tribal languages. The group consisted of 3 individuals of note: Edward Sallow, Bill Calhoun, a physician, as well as a Mormon missionary, Joshua Graham, who also specialized in tribal dialects. However, on their way, this group would encounter a tribe known as the Blackfoot tribe and was immediately captured and held to ransom. This tribe was brutal in combat, however they currently had a problem. They were at war with 7 other tribes, and whilst they could handle themselves in fights, they really did not have the technical knowledge of how to navigate a battlefield and would be outmatched because of it. They needed leadership and needed to learn the basics of warfare. Sallow saw this as an opportunity to save himself himself and his group members and offered to help the Blackfoots against his companions' wishes. Salo was able to give this tribe knowledge in gun maintenance, small unit tactics, military strategy, as well as explosive improvisation. This massively helped the tribe in their war against the other tribes, and because of it, the Blackfoots started to admire and respect Salo, so much in fact that they made him leader almost immediately. Salo seized this opportunity and decided to change his identity. Prior to the followers arriving and meeting the Blackfoot tribe, Salo uncovered a couple of historic books including the history of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire and the, I apologize if I butcher this pronunciation, Commentario di Bello Gallico by Julius Caesar. Salo became obsessed by these books, studying them relentlessly for 2 weeks straight, which would ultimately help him when it came to his tactical knowledge when it came to the battlefield. Now leader of the tribe, Salo changed his name to Kaiser after being inspired by the books and how much he admired the Roman Empire. Kaiser, or Caesar how everyone else would know him as, made this tribe maintain their firearms, properly take out targets, and practice their tactical knowledge when in battle. After this intense training, the tribe went to war fighting back against the other tribes that threatened them. First was the tribe known as the Ridgets, the weakest of them. The tribe, however, refused to surrender, but Caesar didn't hold back and surrounded them, eventually obliterating all of them. The apparent sight of the piles of corpses shocked the other tribesmen who had never seen battles like this before. This wasn't a small battle, this was total warfare. Because of this, both the Kebabs and the Fredonians surrendered immediately to Caesar's tribe, which then created a domino effect with all of the other tribes. Caesar then realized something. These tribes had an identity crisis. They were all split up, and that was causing too much division, making progress way too difficult. He realized that the only option was to unify all of them and create monolithic culture. Forging all of the tribes together into one force, Caesar began invading other tribes all over the region, forming them into his one society. Fighting against these tribes was easy as all of them were extremely primitive, using basic tools to fight their battles. Caesar's forces were just too advanced compared. By 2250, Caesar and his army had taken over southeastern Utah, southwestern Colorado, the western edge of New Mexico, and the northern half of Arizona. His army was now vast, and because of it, he was able to rename it and claim it to be his own unique faction. Here, Caesar declared himself as the son of Mars, the Roman god of war, and his massive force was known as the Great Tribe, the Legion. Graham stayed with Caesar throughout this and became the Legion's first legate, a high-ranked soldier that was solely appointed by Caesar himself. The year was now 2255 and the Legion was grand in scale under the clear rule of Caesar. Their forces are battle-hardened with tons of training, and it was time for them to spread their rule again and take over the rest of the regions around them. Caesar was massively inspired by the rule of Julius Caesar, obviously, and everything he read about the Roman Empire books he aspired to. His overall ideology for the Legion was really simple. It was to survive and bring about long-term stability no matter the cost. With the Legion, he wanted to basically do exactly what the Roman Empire did, take over territories, learn about their cultures, and forge them into one grand legion, offering them knowledge of warfare as well as rebuilding roads and other things of importance in payment for their loyalty. Doing this, by Caesar's logic, was the best way to rebuild the post-apocalyptic society of America. To fully do this, Caesar believed that there had to be a clear society value which was enforced by nationalism and a culture that obliterated the unique individualities of people. There was no value in individuality, it only hindered their progress. Everyone had to work for the state and be simply an instrument of war and production. If they went against this ideology, they would be cast out and most likely crucified. Personal sacrifice was key and fit with the gods that Caesar believed in, most importantly Mars, or his father I guess. Because of this, it meant that the only way they could succeed in their journey and quests was by sacrificing blood and life on the battlefield and in there every day. Because of this logic, the Legion would never bring in robots or machinery into their ranks. These creatures could not bleed for their society, and because of it was seen as useless for their cause. Only human warriors could be sacrificed, and gadgets were not true warriors and would lead to bloodless victories. On top of that, Stimpaks and other chems were massively forbidden as they weren't true to human abilities. Once again, this was an accessory that wouldn't allow for sacrifice. If a warrior went to battle and they were injured, they had to accept that injury as the blood spilled was for the good of their society. Honestly, the Legion had the ideology of survival of the fittest. If you could not fight as a man, you were useless and should be put down. If you required medical attention, you were not strong. The best soldiers within the Legion were those who were strong and did not need medical science to survive in battle, leading them to become deadly veteran soldiers. On top of all of this, democracy was massively spat on. In Caesar's eyes, it simply did not work. It caused division amongst the people of the society and meant they could not focus on the bigger picture. Because of this, a clear hierarchy was put into place to make sure everyone knew their role in society, and if they gave enough for it, they would be promoted, almost like every military system known across the world, all once again inspired by the culture of the Roman Empire. Caesar also claimed that democracy would lead to corrupt, wealthy individuals and landowners putting greed above everything else, meaning the greater good could not move forward. Oddly enough, he's not wrong in that regard. Just look at the NCR. Moving into the social structure of society, this is where a lot of outside wastelanders object to the rule of the Legion, because although their ideas seem extremely brutal, they were able to bring about law and order to some of the more ruthless areas of the country, like Arizona for example, meaning that it was able to rebuild and not worry about constant petty wars all of the time. The Legion, however, has a very segregated society caused by their hierarchy system. Here, men and women are separated into their roles. Women are outright forbidden to fight within the military. That is not simply their role in this society. In the eyes of the hierarchy of the Legion, women are simply just caretakers, healers, midwives, and breeders, and nothing more. They fulfill the traditional roles of women, and in the eyes of Caesar, are essential to help maintain the Legion's continuous campaign of expansion. Priestesses are some of the most important roles within society. These women raise children taken from their parents and raise them to Caesar's doctrine and ideologies. There is this idea that a lot of the male members of society are extremely misogynistic and have somewhat disdain for women, and that can be seen when speaking to some of the members of the Legion. However, for the most part, this segregation is not because of disdain, but mainly to enhance production. Women give birth, so that is their role. End of discussion. That is why in the Legion's eyes they are separated from the men. It's simply to maximize the production increase, and especially when they cannot fight. It means their society is constantly reproducing new potential soldiers for future battles and expansion. With the men within their society, their role is simple. They are the warriors and nothing more. When fighting for Caesar, they have no rights at all. The only choice they can make is where and when they die for him. They can advance up the ranks, but most of the time their experience doesn't make much difference. Whilst they can get better weapons as they fight on, most of the time they are just there to fight until they eventually die, and then get discarded by the Legion to make room for the next line of soldiers, as is the lessons of the cult of Mars, the religion of the Legion. Soldiers within the Legion are made up of men born into the Legion or any able-bodied men who have been enslaved by them. This makes their expansion into new regions really important, as it meant they were able to get access to new soldiers, ones they honestly couldn't care less about, and if they died, it meant their blood was spilled, meaning victory was certain. Speaking of slaves, the Legion is founded on slaves. Everyone that is captured is put to use in society. If they have a certain skill, it will be put to use, and if they are weak, cannot fight, and have no skills, they will be discarded. Everything within the Legion is about using everything around them, and every person they encounter will be captured and put to use after passing the initial tests. So if you get captured within the Wasteland, you will first be called captures. If you have a specific skill, you'll be doing that for the Legion. Or if you are just a healthy male, you'll be straight on the front line fighting against their enemies whether you like it or not. Some who are unfit for combat duty as a legionnaire are expected to adhere to their master without question and are put into rags. Their name is changed, and a giant bright red X is painted over their chest, with some having slave collars on them at all times to make sure they don't escape. With that said, however, those that live under Caesar's rule claim that he is actually a caring lord that doesn't like to get involved unless someone causes trouble within society. In fact, a lot of people quite like living under his rule, as this is far better than living out within the chaotic wasteland. The Legion is extremely organized with its own religion, set roles, clear structure, and strict rules that help society to progress forward. Whilst it is completely brutal to outsiders and goes against any modern views of life, to a lot of its societal members, it's a safe haven away from the deadly wasteland run by raiders, bandits, and other factions who are constantly at war. The Legion has a goal, and that is to constantly expand and bring about the ideals to the wasteland of America. However, moving into the 2270s, Caesar's encountered a problem. A rival faction known as the NCR, the New California Republic, were controlling the heart of New Vegas and stopping the Legion's expansion and assimilation of America's resources. Caesar could not have this go on. It was time for the Legion to go to war against the NCR. By 2271, New California had noticed the Legion was taking over regions at an incredible pace. The society was utilizing slaves taken from all over the land and villages and had been burning them to the ground as their forces were quickly moving through. As the NCR took the Hoover Dam and signed their treaty with the Desert Rangers, the Legion hit back after this event, realizing they needed to better themselves to win this war. Here they moved further into the west of the Mojave Desert and established a base of operations on Fortification Hill overlooking Lake Mead and the Colorado River in the year 2277. With now 87 tribes under their new rule of Caesar, the Legion made contact with the NCR near New Vegas and began trying to take the region utilizing their full force. During this time, Caesar found the Hoover Dam thanks to the help of Ulysses. Caesar knew this was a crucial asset to have and began focusing all of his efforts on taking it, claiming it would be his Rubicon to be crossed before taking New Vegas to set it up as his version of Rome. Alpi Legate ordered a direct attack on the NCR troops at the Hoover Dam, a battle that saw countless casualties operating on both sides, and witnessing this, General Lee Oliver ordered his troops back to the middle of the dam. They also made sure that when fighting against the Legion legionnaires and veteran soldiers to try and take them out before they got too close to their ranks, and if they got close, the Legion's choice in melee weaponry would tear through them and would mean sure defeat. The Legion also changed their tactics up during this battle and forced their strict tactical strategy of putting the raw recruits up front and veterans at the back. This strategy, however, would be a huge mistake for the Legion. As the battle went ahead, the NCR were able to hold their ground and just pick off the veterans from the back thanks to their sharpshooters. The veterans being taken out by sharpshooters would then lead to the Boulder City event, where all of the high-ranking Legion soldiers would be taken out by a massive bomb. This would lead to NCR victory, of course, and the Legion to retreat embarrassingly. Graham, who was in charge of the attack, was punished to show the failure was not an option. Here Graham was covered in pitch, set ablaze, and thrown into the Grand Canyon. Caesar was not messing about anymore. After this, Legate Lanius was assigned Graham's role and was sent out eastward to claim further tribes for Caesar's force, to allow him to try and take over Hoover Dam again, but this time without failure. After a year of finding new tribes to conquer and assimilate into the Legion, Caesar now has 14 new tribes back in his forces ready to take out the NCR, take over the Hoover Dam, and eventually the New Vegas Strip. The year is now 2281 and the second battle of the Hoover Dam is yet to be decided. But either way, the Legion's forces have to be admired. They had spread throughout the areas at an incredible pace, utilizing pure human force without any real additions of robots, machinery, or drugs to help their cause. They fought with brute strength and were able to unite hundreds of tribes to fight as one unit. No matter what the courier chose at the second battle of Hoover Dam, everyone will remember the terrifying and brutal strength of Caesar's Legion and will forever remember the phrase, Ave, true to Kaiser. And it is quite clear that the Legion is still going as we see them in 2290 roaming about the area, maybe under a new leadership, but that is yet to be decided. But either way, their threat is still out there. The year was 2020, and whilst our universe was stuck inside trying to stay sane whilst a virus was taking over the planet, in the Fallout universe, Robert House would be born on the 25th of June within Las Vegas, Nevada. Unfortunately, Robert's life didn't get off to a good start, where at the age of just 2 years old, he would go on to be orphaned due to his parents being both killed off in a freak accident that involved an autogyro and a lightning strike. Not only that, but he was also cheated out of his inheritance by his half-brother Anthony House, an owner of the H&H Tools Company, believing that he was the only legitimate son of his father, and with that the rightful heir to everything. Despite all of that, it did not slow down Robert, as he went on to attend the Commonwealth Institute of Technology, learning everything he could about technology as well as business, and after learning all he could, left it and went on to start up the company of Robco Industries in the year of 2042, making Robert House a business owner at the age of just 22 years old. Under House's leadership, Robco Industries quickly rose up the ranks and became one of the most profitable corporations the world had ever seen, focusing mainly on robotics and software, which had been on the rise for years. House just had that young spark that was needed within that industry, as he had brand new ideas for how technology should progress further, and on top of that was a fierce business leader. If he wanted something to work and go ahead, it would go ahead. House didn't take no for an answer. even at his young age. By this point, House was so successful that even his own peers were envious of him, and the tabloids frequently wrote articles about him stating he was a phenomenal yet eccentric businessman. It's unknown if this is factually correct. However, House has stated himself that at the age of just 30 years old, the company he founded was so successful that it had amassed a net worth of $30 billion or more, really going to show that Robert House was the next big thing, and he did it all without his father's inheritance or his half-brother's help. With House now one of the wealthiest men alive, he began investing in a ton of other corporations and early projects, and started investing in the companies of Repcon Aerospace, the Lucky 38 Hotel and Casino located in the Las Vegas Boulevard, and even plans to take over his half-brother's inherited business of H&H Tools Company, as Robert House started setting up plans to ruin its look on the stock market, as his half-brother Anthony started to get extremely paranoid about Robert because of how successful he had become, and thought he was taking him out from the inside of his own company, something that later in his career House would use to his own advantage. Despite all of this wealth and fame that Robert was enjoying, not everything painted him in a good light, as one article written by a foreign tabloid named El Periódico de las Aburridas spoke about House's relationship with a starlet. According to this article, Robert House and this young starlet never did anything within the bedroom. Instead, House only used her to scan her brain as he made her dress in multiple different outfits, most likely working on one of his new projects for Robco. Most who read this story thought it was a weird quirk of House, but it seems not much was investigated into it, especially within America itself. That, or he was too powerful for anything to get published within his own country. One other weird obsession that House did during his free time, it seems, was designing and running mathematical paradigms that were based on global political and socio-economic conditions to try and predict everything that was going to happen within the future, most likely to get ahead of any business ventures and to move money about if the stocks were looking a bit dodgy. These little experiments came to light the most within the year of 2065, where they went on to predict that the world would be engulfed in a nuclear war within the next 15 years, around the year of 2080. And with that prediction coming through for House, he quickly got to planning. But before working on anything, Robert went on to attend a secret meeting along with other high-ranking American corporate CEOs who confirmed his predictions. Attending the meeting alongside Barb Howard and Bub Askins of Vault-Tec, Frederick Sinclair of the Sierra Madre, Julia Masters of Repcon Aerospace, and Leon von Felden of West-Tech, Howard went on to state that they were planning to detonate the bombs themselves to make sure that they can continue to profit massively from it. Hearing Vault-Tec's plan of placing people inside vaults to allow communities to continue into the new world, House argued they wouldn't work as they were too confined, and people being put together for long periods of time will drive them utterly mad, making him question if vault dwellers would actually live long enough to see the new world, and if they'll be any better off than those who stayed on the surface. It could also be argued that even though this secret meeting might look like House was all for the nukes going off and these corporations would continue to profit from it, House actually would have rather the world stayed the way it was, and he kept doing the business that way. After all, thanks to his ventures in the Lucky 38 Casino and his many other businesses, he was a billionaire, and obliterating the world wouldn't have kept him as such, initially at least. That isn't canon, however. This isn't part of the lore. That's more of a personal gripe with this secret meeting from the TV series. However, that said, he would go on to own all of the Las Vegas Strip as a result, so you could argue that it benefited him in that way. But I still think if the bombs hadn't been organized, House could have purchased most of it at some point anyway. But despite all of that going ahead with the secret meeting and House's calculations predicting the bombs to fall around the year of 2080, he finally got to work making sure that his city of Las Vegas would survive the nuclear apocalypse that was going to devastate America. But more importantly, making sure he survived as well so that he could continue his work and business within the new world, however it might look. House came up with multiple plans to make all of this work. His first was to make sure that if any of the nuclear bombs came towards his city, he was going to install countermeasures that would disable them mid-flight, turning them into duds and unable to destroy Las Vegas. If any were to make it through his initial plan, he would then go on to set up other factors that would directly destroy them without them going off. When it came to his own survival, this was a different plan altogether. With this, he would go on to place his physical body, which had been heavily enhanced, into a life support device, which would mean his physical presence was removed from the world completely. His brain, however, would go on to be wired directly into his massive information network that he had been developing for many years, and all through his enormous supercomputer. With all that set up and put through some testing, Robert House was ready and prepared for whatever might come next, or so he thought anyway. Whilst House was busy with all of his contingency plans to make sure none of the bombs fell onto his city, he also had one other chip up his sleeve, no pun intended. On the 22nd of October 2077, one day before the Great War began, House would go on to print a platinum chip that he had designed himself, containing a vital OS upgrade for his Securitrons, as well as the laser defense network that would help his plan to save the city go with ease. Without this chip, the system would have major problems dealing with everything and would most likely fail or have major problems along the way. As the chip was all made out within Sunnyvale, it was sent out for delivery to be handed over in the afternoon of October 23rd, 2077. However, House's calculations were slightly wrong, as he had miscalculated when the delivery was going to take place by a few hours, meaning the platinum chip was late, and unfortunately for House, 20 hours before the chip's scheduled delivery was to take place, the Great War officially begun, and with bombs launching all over the country, the platinum chip would go on to be lost within the ruins of the wasteland and would not be recovered for another 200 years. With House not having that vital upgrade he needed for his Securitrons and the laser grid defense, his system went through multiple crashes, trying desperately to protect his precious city. But luckily for House, most of the nuclear warheads that were aimed at it were unable to get through, as his forces had miraculously fought them off. House's plan that was so carefully thought out early on almost came crashing down around him because of some miscalculations and an extremely temperamental system that kept failing at different times. With the Great War over though, House had technically done what he set out to do. Las Vegas was relatively saved, even if some bombs had made their way through. However, with all of his systems running on old software, a lot of House's life-preserving measures were not working as intended, the same as his security forces, which resulted in House being sent into an extremely long coma, and without his presence being there, the remains of Vegas were being picked over by the wasteland it sat in. This wasn't the end for Robert House, however. Thanks to his incredible life support device and all of the enhancements made to his body, whilst he was in a coma, he would eventually wake up to the new world and start to rule over his city once again, bringing in a new age for Las Vegas. The year was now 2138, 55 years after the Great War had taken out many of the cities of America, and the incredible corporate entity of Robert House finally awoke from his long coma. But House was smart. He didn't jump straight into action, announcing to all that he was back to rule over them. Instead, he stayed extremely quiet, hid inside his Lucky 38 casino, and looked out for any signs that might help him out on his new goal. After 138 years of waiting and observing the land around him, House finally emerged on the world stage once again in the year of 2274, as his Securitrons under his command emerged from out of the Lucky 38 to start doing their rounds and forming some order over Las Vegas. The reason for why these Securitrons jumped into action was all thanks to the new California Republic scouts who had made it to the Hoover Dam, triggering alerts all over House's home and releasing them out into the world. House knew this was the perfect opportunity to assert his dominance on the land, and with that enlisted the help of raider tribes living within the newly named New Vegas. These raider tribes under House's leadership renamed themselves as the Three Families, including the Chairman, the Emerters, and the White Glove Society, who together with House and his forces helped helped rebuild the city once again, and with it established the free economic zone of New Vegas, placing Robert House as its president, CEO, and sole proprietor to make sure they were fully set up and ready for the full arrival of the NCR's army, who were now arriving in full force into the Mojave and looking to take the Hoover Dam. House knew that with the NCR's help he could get the Hoover Dam working, which would generate power all over New Vegas, and with that plan gave the NCR permission to use the defunct McCarran International Airport as their new headquarters in exchange for their help with the dam, and together the two factions signed the New Vegas Treaty, which allowed the New Vegas Strip to be safe from any annexation attempt by the NCR or anyone else. With all that coming to light and the new families being set up within the New Vegas Strip, it was a time of prosperity for House as New Vegas became a major power in the Mojave Wasteland, and by 2281 had a strong connection with the NCR, who had multiple trade deals with them and helped his city thrive even further. House knew that the NCR's war with the Legion was only going to get worse, however, and used it as a chance for him to stretch out even further into the Mojave and expand his control of the region. During this time, he also started forging a new view on the world and forming ideas that would help him on his ultimate goal for New Vegas. House had hated the attitudes and actions of the pre-war United States, who were not focusing on researching and developing alternative technologies before the Great War, and now that the world had essentially been reset, he could use this opportunity to guide and forge a new future for mankind, one that was free from the corrupt influences of the past, and one where technology and research projects could be encouraged to help mankind thrive. That said, emotions are never really taken into account with these big decisions, as they are all done through mathematical calculations. Seeing both the NCR and Legion warring made House angry, but also laugh, as he would compare them to two snarling dogs fighting over a curve of bone, also claiming that both the NCR and Legion, and other factions for that matter, are just regurgitations of the past, and they offer nothing of a new future for mankind. They just want what it was back in the day, which in House's eyes is not sustainable. With the NCR, for example, he claims they are a society of customers, led by scheming leaders who only want to take Vegas from underneath him, whilst the Legion absolutely disgusts House, as they use slavery, but are also technophobic and are brutal in nature, something that is so far back in humanity's past that House has no time for it. House is extremely clear with his goals, and will stop at nothing until they become a reality, but insists that his leadership of an autocracy will not involve monitoring or controlling the lives of others. In his own words, "I have no interest in abusing others, just as I have no interest in legislating or otherwise dictating what people do in their private time, nor have I any interest in being worshipped as some kind of machine god messiah. I am impervious to such corrupting ambitions, but autocracy, firm control in the hands of technological and economic visionary, yes, that Vegas shall have." Despite these bold views for a better civilization, working with the NCR only to help boost his own ambitions for the moment, House never left the comfort of the Lucky 38 during his time in the New World, as he just used his Securitrons to do all the work for him. No one else also entered the building, as it was completely off limits, making House extremely mysterious to those venturing into the Strip. That said, just next to him was also the people of Vault 21, and without hesitation, House made an offer to them, a gamble for ownership of the vault, which he would indeed win, as the House always wins, which he would then strip of all of its useful technology, and had plans to permanently seal the vault away by filling it with cement. Sarah Weintraub, however, one of the vault dwellers from Vault 21, argued that it could be valuable to House on the Strip, and instead of sealing it off, they could turn it into a hotel instead, as it still had all of the casino equipment inside it from the vault's experiment, and with it they could profit from those visiting the city. With this pitch being heard, House agreed that this was more beneficial to his city, and with that, the Vault 21 hotel was officially set up, giving the people of the Mojave a luxury place to stay within the heart of New Vegas. New Vegas was thriving during this point with so much to see and do, but Mr. House had one thing on his mind, something that had been on his mind ever since he was put into a coma 2 centuries ago. That was getting his platinum chip and using it to upgrade his security OS. House had been looking for this chip ever since he woke back up, and his Securitrons were roaming the land, spending millions of caps on scavenger teams and prospectors who would dig through all of the rubble of the old world, and eventually one day they would find it within the ruin of Sunnyvale, 204 years after it had been made. With the chip being recovered, House knew he couldn't just have it delivered the standard way, and immediately set up a layered plot that involved multiple couriers to distract anyone who might know of the chip's importance. Whilst one courier would handle the delivery of the platinum chip, the other couriers would carry packages that were mainly miscellaneous junk to try and throw off anyone looking for this special package, and on top of that, mercenary teams were paid to screen the routes that they were to be taking. Courier 6 would officially be the one to make this crucial delivery for House's ultimate plan, but like it did 204 years ago, the platinum chip would not make its journey to the Lucky 38, as it would be intercepted by the chairman's leader named Benny in the town of Goodsprings, after he was informed of the chip's existence and route by the modified Securitron named Yes Man, who used a backdoor into House's data stream. Benny had one plan, and that was to use the chip as a means to gain control of the strip as a whole and make it a fully independent power in the wasteland, free from the machines of his employer. House did, however, have spies placed throughout the wasteland to keep an eye on matters going on, more specifically a Securitron named Victor, who reported Benny's actions back to House, alerting him to the problem he now faces, and who had stolen the platinum chip from him and taken out his courier. House was furious that he had been betrayed by one of his 3 families, and more outraged at the fact that it was Benny who was the man who did it, with House claiming that he was a potential protege and a right-hand man, able to achieve tasks he alone could not. But despite his rage, House had to hide all knowledge of what he knew, saving it for a time when it best suited him so he could get the upper hand on Benny. Victor, however, also gave some new news to House along with the tale of Benny. That news being that Courier 6 had actually survived Benny's interception and was back on their path to the strip from Goodsprings. With that brilliant news, House started planning an invite to them, inviting them into the Lucky 38 in the hopes of using their want for revenge on Benny to reclaim the platinum chip, and finally, after years of waiting and countless problems, use it to upgrade his security forces operating system. But the courier would not only have to deal with the struggle between House and Benny, they would also encounter the heated conflict between the Legion and the NCR, as well as other factions living within the Mojave wasteland, meaning their view on everything going on and what was best for humanity would be swayed due to their actions. The courier would essentially get multiple choices to make about which direction this part of the wasteland goes. With that said, however, Mr. House is an extremely intelligent man who comes to some bold conclusions about what will happen in the future. Whilst he made a few errors that almost cost him everything, he got through it all and has continued to live for 204 years since that massive day that changed the whole world. I think it's safe to say that his legacy will live on forever. He was the man that denied the destruction of one of America's biggest landmarks and continued to be a successful businessman and leader even after the world burned around him. House is easily one of the strongest individuals in the land, and without him, the Mojave and Nevada would most likely be in a much worse place, where the only factions who inhabit it were just remnants of the old world who would only want to bicker and fight like the United States did back before the Great War. Whilst his rule might seem cold, calculated and without emotion, you can argue his worldview is the best for the whole of America, as he wants to see this new world blossom into something new and great. Located within New Vegas itself is also the faction known as the Kings. In the year of 2274, Mr. House was creating his perfect society once again and made it clear he was taking over the Strip. One tribe who were located within the Strip at the time was told they could not stay there any longer because they refused to reform, and as a result were pushed out of the area. Whilst they were out there within the ruins, one young member of the tribe would go on to find a pre-war building that was named the King's School of Impersonation, and with it would find tons of merchandise that seemed to be solely around one individual, a man who dressed in elegant attire and was incredibly talented as a singer, and the people of the pre-war world would go on to know him as simply the King. Seeing this as a sign from above, this young scavenger took on the name and appearance of this said king and started a new philosophy for life, where people should live with respect as well as a personal freedom. Returning back to his tribe and explaining what his new view was, the rest of them were massively inspired and immediately followed in suit, as they all went on to call themselves kings and dressed in a similar style to the King. They would all dress in denim, have their hair gelled up and had leather jackets on at all times. Now ready for a new life, these individuals would set themselves up within the King's School of Impersonation building in Freeside, along with their new companion, the cyberdog known as Rex. With the help of this new goal that they had created, the Kings rose to power within Freeside and became a real dominant force, making it clear that they were completely independent from the factions of the NCR and Mr. House and his free economic zone of New Vegas. With that said, during 2281, the NCR started to move into Freeside and started to take up space there, threatening the King's rule and their existence, making it tense and making many worry that a battle was going to take place here, where the NCR would most likely win. The Kings would see them as the devil in disguise and desperately wanted to push them out and would use as much force as possible. However, this is where the internal conflict kicked in, as their second in command, Pacer, would be nudging this conflict between the two to make it all happen, as he would escalate tensions behind their backs. This of course would be something the Courier would have to deal with in their own way. It's unknown currently what has happened to the Kings, but it's clear they are still there in 2290, but now they are heavily ghoulified and it is unknown why, and it's most likely due to some of the events that happened within the second Battle of Hoover Dam. But as of 2281, they are just a small tribe wanting to live their own unique lives with the mantra of every man is a king in his own right. Originally, the Followers of the Apocalypse, also known as just the Followers, were an extremely secular tribe formed just outside of the pre-war area of San Diego that is now known as Dayglow. The members of this tribe were all vault dwellers who wanted to focus their new society on developing and recovering medical technology. This whole focus started because of a sickness that started spreading throughout all of the settlements of Dayglow due to the proximity of the Glow, a place known for being a massive radiation storm. As a result, the Followers migrated to the Boneyard, formerly known as Los Angeles, but it was not a nice experience at all, as the now leader of this faction, the lady known as Nicole, would go on to lose both of her parents during it. Because of all of these events, Nicole had a new mission in life for her faction, and that was to try and restore the wasteland and to raise awareness to how the world got to where it is today and to try and prevent it happening once again. They would do this by educating anyone who sought them out, focusing primarily on how devastating the bombs were and how many human lives they took. Now set up in the Boneyard Library in 2161, they became renowned throughout this whole settlement and were regarded as being polite and educated individuals, but were also considered as being not truly cut out for this world because they weren't strong enough, with some even questioning how they hadn't been taken out as of yet. Despite that, they would continue trying to tell everyone they could about the horrors of war, as well as explaining how medicine worked and the technologies involved. However, in that same year, they would go on to hear about another faction that was rising to power, known as the Children of the Cathedral, who were experimenting out somewhere in the wasteland, but were considered to be a peace-minded cult like them. Nicole would send out spies to try and see what they were doing, and with it would find out that they were using FEV to turn people into super mutants, and this was all confirmed by a survivor of the FEV known as Talius. With that information, the Followers put aside their peaceful ways and went to war against the Children of the Cathedral to stop these horrific actions on the people of the wasteland. Thanks to the actions of the Vault Dweller in that same year, the Master and his super mutants would be shut down completely, and with it, the Followers would be able to continue their expansion out into the wasteland without anyone getting in their way. The Followers grew massively during this time and established control all over the Boneyard, turning it into a higher learning and research facility. After this event, as the NCR started to rise to power, they would see the power of the Followers and immediately sided with them, creating a solid relationship with them, gaining access to their medical technology and a strong education system, turning this area into the first full-fledged educational institution of the world, with the main location being the Angels Boneyard Medical University. By 2246, Followers were being sent out from Boneyard to other places of the wasteland to help spread education and also form new political influence, with some even being sent all the way out to former states of Wyoming to try and understand all of the tribes out there and their dialects. Two of those followers, the aforementioned Bill Calhoun and Edward Sallow, would venture into the Grand Canyon and the former state of Arizona, and thanks to everything we have explored earlier, would eventually go on to form into the Legion. With Sallow now known as Caesar and abandoning the ways of the followers' relationship with the NCR grew even further and began to prosper. That was until the new president was elected, President Aaron Kimball, who enacted the pacification of Mojave and his takeover of the Hoover Dam. Julie Farks, who had migrated to the Mojave with the followers, heard about the NCR's plan for this part of the country, and immediately hearing about it was appalled, and as a result, tensions started to rise between the two groups. With that, the followers started to share less of their technology and medical knowledge, trying to make it clear that they were not wanting to support this expansion out into the Mojave. Not only that, but the followers also had internal conflicts happening within their society, as many hated how knowledge and education was the main focus of their organization, and they wanted to do more. Eventually in 2275, the followers hit their boiling point, and a schism took place where a new organization would take off. Named the Office of Science and Industry, this group focused on actually using science in their day-to-day instead of just learning about it, and with their existence became rivals to their former colleagues and also sided more with the NCR and their new goals, offering them a higher education system that the followers had taken away from them. That said, just because they had gone against the followers, it didn't mean that they were against their worldviews. They still wanted to make it a peaceful place and raise awareness of the horrors of the past world. They just wanted to do more than what the followers were currently doing. By 2281, the NCR had completely turned their backs on the followers and had sought out the help of other organizations like the OSI. Believing they had been betrayed by this even larger organization, the followers now despised the NCR and have taken up new smear campaigns to try and turn people away from the NCR and bring them into either their organization or just to rebel against them and their movement into the Mojave. Who knows where they are in 2290, but if the NCR have won the second battle of the Hoover Dam, it's most likely that the followers have been pushed out of the area, or if they are still there, they are heavily hindered and are still trying desperately to just educate everyone on how the NCR might be bringing about the same events that were happening just prior to the Great War of 2077. The Brotherhood story is large and will be explored in a later video. However, for this one we will focus specifically on the Mojave chapter as mentioned before. After the Master's death back in 2162, thanks to the actions of a Vault Dweller, the Brotherhood realized they couldn't just remain in their headquarters in Lost Hills. They needed to venture out and aid other settlements from the ongoing super mutant presence. A presence that was still around despite their master being taken out. With that, one group was sent out to the former state of Nevada to secure the Hoover Dam for themselves after researching the importance of it and its technology from back in the day, and as they did so, the Mojave chapter had officially been formed. That said, it was mainly created due to big disagreements that were happening within the Council of Elders. The disagreements came from one individual named Elijah, who was a former scribe, now turned elder, who wanted to really push for the developments of new technologies instead of just grabbing some from the old world and utilizing them. This did not sit well with the conservative elders within their ranks, as they felt this went against their ways. Eventually, Elijah went on to develop new ethically questionable weapons to use for the Brotherhood. But this was the final straw. The other elders decided to set him up on their mission to the Hoover Dam, and with it would be rid of him and his questionable ideas. Whether his mission would be a success, it was unknown by them, but they didn't really care. He just had to go without it turning into something nasty. Now with his own group of Brotherhood of Steel members, the Mojave chapter would reach the wasteland and would discover an old but intact military bunker within Hidden Valley and used it as their new base of operations. Once they set up there, they looked to see what else was in the area, and with it discovered the solar power plant named the Helios 1. Despite many really trusting Elijah and his goals, they would follow him in his new mission to garrison the power plant and turn it into their new Brotherhood of Steel headquarters. This, however, did not go down well at all with all of the other paladins within the chapter. When the Helios 1 was claimed, the Brotherhood went around for a good while experiencing the wasteland for themselves, unchallenged by anyone, or if they were challenged, it really wasn't that big of a deal. Their might was far more powerful than anyone else. That all changed, however, in 2273, when suddenly out of nowhere, a large contingent of NCR troops entered from New California and took the Hoover Dam for themselves before the Brotherhood could even think about taking it and succeeding in their original mission. This also led to Elijah completely ignoring one of the biggest distributors of energy weapons coming into the Mojave Desert and immediately told all of his lessers that they were never to deal with the Van Graffs. They needed to leave them alone. By 2274, this is where the NCR Brotherhood War took place, a war we have already explored to some extent, but it saw the deaths of many of the Brotherhood of Steel members, and with it, Elijah would completely abandon all of them and venture out to continue his extremely dubious research, but without anyone knowing where he had really gone to. McNamara had taken over the role of leader because of this, as he ordered everyone to retreat from the Helios 1 power station and venture back to their original base within the Hidden Valley bunker. With this major loss, the Brotherhood of Steel Mojave chapter was completely in ruins, crippled by the might of the NCR and forced into hiding until something dramatic happened. They had not been wiped out, however, and so would continue on their plans to try and get themselves a new mission and build up their resources. Head Paladin McNamara now took the reins, however he was an extremely paranoid mad now, worried that they would eventually be discovered and wiped out as a result. Because of this, he would limit outside assignments and really reduce anyone venturing up out of the bunker. Their only way of doing things was to do them at night and to make sure no one could see where they had come from and where they were going. This worked for a while. However, the constricting space left those members down below to start getting a bit frustrated and temperatures were rising. Eventually there was to be a boiling point and something was going to have to change. By 2281, the Brotherhood Order became completely isolated and things were only getting worse. No outsiders were allowed at all, and none were allowed even close to the bunker. If they did find themselves near the bunker, they would be immediately killed without hesitation. The only real chance for many of them to see the surface during this time was through virtual reality simulators for gun practice and training, but only a few were allowed out on the nightly raids and resource runs. With the lockdown looking like it was never going to lift, a split started to form as Head Paladin Edgar Hardin would look at trying to get rid of McNamara and ending his rule of isolationism. Few supported his cause, however, mainly due to the fact that back when the NCR war happened, McNamara was the one who saved them from being totally wiped out, and because of that they owe him their lives, even if they totally disagreed with his policies. However, maybe with the help of some that were willing to risk it and go against the Elder, they could make a change and stop hiding in a cramped bunker, creeping out in the middle of the night just to survive for another week. One of the big plans the Brotherhood came up with during this time was discovering that there was a great place to install a remote signal transmitter and gain access to a radar system. This was located within Black Mountain, a place they had not bothered with out of respect for the peaceful mutant population located there under the leadership of Marcus. However, Marcus had now gone from this location by this point, and the new leader located there, the Nightkin known as Tabitha, did not warrant the same respect, and now it was an open playing field for them. This was vital for them because they needed to gather as much intelligence as possible to prepare for the Brotherhood's venture back to the surface. As for the NCR during this time, they still deemed the Brotherhood as being a massive threat and that they were the ones responsible for NCR scouts going missing near the Helios power plant. Not only was it the NCR that the Brotherhood had upset, but it was also Mr. House who had lost a ton of Securitrons to the Brotherhood forces just after the Helios attack and as they got back to the Hidden Valley. Ultimately, the Mojave Brotherhood chapter, despite being a pretty crippled group, was still feared by many in the Mojave and would be seen as hostile immediately. Mr. House, for example, has run calculations and analysed a future where the Brotherhood insurgency is to be the greatest threat to his long-term reign over the Mojave wasteland because of how proficient they are with their technology. The Yes-Man's calculations are also very similar, as he believes the Mojave Brotherhood as the biggest enemy of anyone as they seek a sovereign over New Vegas. And if one thing is for certain here, Mr. House's calculations are always extremely accurate. However, maybe a war where the Brotherhood still take over New Vegas is much closer than he or Yes Men have actually calculated, and maybe we will witness it very soon. Our story of the Great Khans begins like most with a vault, more specifically Vault 15. We've already talked about Vault 15 and how it brought about people with different ideologies, but when the vault doors opened once again and the residents poured out, stripping the vault of all of its precious resources and valuable equipment, one of these groups that left the vault took with them the most precious resource the vault housed, a Garden of Eden creation kit. That of course would be the people living in Shady Sands, but for the other groups, more importantly the group that would go on to call themselves the Khans, these individuals would leave the vault in the year of 2141 and would come together fully in the winter of that year. The Khans only really had one ambition in life, and that was becoming successful warriors and raiders, locating any town they could find within the land and robbing them for all they had. The name most likely coming from the Mongol Empire leader Genghis Khan, who was also known for this brutal, ambitious lifestyle back in the early 13th century. Like Caesar's legion being inspired by Julius Caesar, it would be safe to say that at some point one of the members, either before or after they went to the vault, was inspired by texts of Genghis's life, and because of it, wanted a taste of that emperor's life as well. As the Khans ventured around looting villages for resources and loot, they would also go on to burn down any building or possession that was of no use to them, as well as capturing survivors and using them as slaves for their newly formed society. A lot of similarities would be formed with Caesar's Legion, who, granted at this time didn't fully exist yet, but regardless the two share a lot of similar ideologies. One in particular was fundamental to their societies, that one being survival of the fittest. Fitness and strength was seen as a key virtue and would be displayed through hand-to-hand combat to prove who exactly was the strongest and that they were worthy of a role in the Khans. If one was not strong enough to be a part of this society, they would be labelled as weak and would most likely be killed in hand-to-hand combat or be killed by their tribe's leader. With this view that strength was key for their society, this would mean the Khans would actively seek out other tribes to battle against them to test their mettle. One of their most memorable displays of this was when they went to battle against another tribe also from Vault 15, named the Jackals. This war against the Jackals really proved how strong the Khans were during this time, as they absolutely destroyed them, forcing them to completely flee the New California Northeast area in the year of 2155. But exactly 6 years later, the Khan's leadership would change in an extremely brutal fashion. Here, the tribe member and son of the Khan's leader, Garl Deathhand, would kill his own father to prove he was the stronger member of the family, and on top of that, become the new leader of the Khans. Now the new leader of this tribe, Garl and his warband would become a dominant element within the wasteland, constantly going out to raid smaller settlements and communities, as well as setting up trade links with Junktown and the Hub. With his warband being extremely successful during this time, Garl became extremely delusional, believing that he and his Khans could take over the entire world, which to many other individuals within Junktown and the Hub would be seen as laughable. Eventually, Garl would step up his operations, and the Khans would become more hostile throughout the wasteland, especially up north where many settlements were facing complete destruction. But this new ambition of taking over the world would ultimately lead to his inevitable downfall and the fall of his Khans. As Garl went around thinking he was the next big thing, he would make one big mistake, and that was by capturing Shady Sands' leader, Aradesh's daughter, Tandy. As Tandy had been captured, a sole vault dweller from Vault 13, hunting down a new water chip for his failing vault, would hear of this and seek to help Aradesh get her back. Locating the raider group, the vault dweller would prove that Garl's dream of taking over the world were indeed delusional, as the vault dweller would go on to slaughter Garl and his tribesmen and save Tandy in the process. The Khan's power had now dropped massively as their leader had been shut down by a lone vault dweller. Because of this change in power, the Khans would dwindle and the NCR would be able to rise in power to create order all over the California area. But this wasn't it for the Khans, obviously, as one member had survived the onslaught of the vault dweller. That member was Garl's own son named Darion, who had escaped during the attack. For a while, Darion would go on his own way, picking up the pieces of the small Khans who had suffered from Garl's loss. However, eventually, Darion would suffer from survivor's guilt and began plotting his revenge against Tandy, who he believed caused all of this and had now become the new leader of the New California Republic. With this new goal from Darion, the new Khans were set up, and their goal was to now shut down President Tandy of the NCR. With the wasteland now free from the threat of the massively powerful Khans under the rule of Garl, the New California Republic were able to emerge and become an absolute superpower, setting up trade links and allowing for more law and order throughout the land. Electing Tandy as their new president, Darion became absolutely obsessed with his new plan of taking her out, constantly living with the regret that he hid and lived rather than dying honorably with his gang. Not only did he become extremely obsessed by this, but he also became overwhelmingly paranoid, believing that Tandy was actually out to get him. But luckily for him, this doesn't hold back his overall ambition. But now that the first Khans had been destroyed completely by the Vault Dweller, Darion was not able to bring together the previous Khan members and instead had to settle for mercenaries to populate his new Khan's tribe. The year was now 2241, and going back to where it all started, Darion and his band of mercenaries set up their base within the ruins of Vault 15, using a large band of vagrants to provide a smokescreen. Within the vault before this, however, were a group of squatters, and Darion knew he needed them to secure this as his base. Promising them he would bring the vault back to its glory days and restoring all of its functions, he would ask for their loyalty in return, making the squatter deter NCR attempts to retake the vault for themselves. Whilst living in Vault 15, Darion and his mercenaries would continue to capture squatters as well as regularly raiding Republican caravans for water and food to make sure the vault continued to look like a functioning bunker. On top of this, Darion also used guerrilla tactics and placed a spy within the NCR Congress, which allowed him to get regular intel on their movements and future plans. But with all of this in place, seemingly like Darien would be able to extract his revenge on Tandy and with it the NCR, allowing the new Khans to be a dominant power once again, it was to all fall apart once again as another lone individual, labelled the Chosen One, entered the equation. Sent on a mission by Tandy herself, the Chosen One was to seek out Vault 15 and acquire computer parts from it. With this, the Vault Dweller was able to broker a deal between the squatters and the Republic, and with it would leave Darien and his new Khans vulnerable, eventually wiping them out and retrieving the parts. With the new Khans' new base now empty from their rule, the squatters allowed the NCR full access to the Vault in exchange for annexation, education, and supplies necessary to survive. The Khans who once inhabited New California were now completely gone. Gull had built up one of the most fierce raider tribes known all over the wasteland, but it was not enough. And although Darien tried to recreate what they once had, they were never the same. Forming mercenaries would never be the same as they would never share that same culture as before. But thanks to two lone individuals, their power was now non-existent and their terrifying rule was just something of the past. But amazingly, this was not the end for the Khans. Despite Darien believing he was the only remaining survivor of his tribe, there were indeed others. But seeing their power dwindle over the years, this group would seek prosperity elsewhere, and it was only in the year of 2267 would they appear once again, but this time under a new name and leader. This time, the raider group would be known as the Great Khans. As the NCR made their way into the Mojave Desert, a few of the Khan survivors also ventured that way, collecting other members in their travels. At first they were just a small group trying to survive whilst looking for a new home where they could rebuild themselves. However, as they ventured further, the Khans started growing, and with it became a unified, large tribe all run under the leadership of one man they would label as Papa Khan, who would continue to lead them into the Mojave. As they assembled within the Mojave, the new Great Khans would come into contact with the followers of the Apocalypse, a pacifist group desperately trying to educate those within the wasteland about the errors of humanity way before and during the Great War, hoping a war like this would never happen again. Willing to educate and help everyone regardless of their backgrounds, the Khans were taught basic science skills such as chemistry, as well as reading and writing. The followers were extremely hopeful that with this education, the Great Khans would go on to do good within the community, developing medicine for those who needed it. But as expected, the Great Khans had other ideas for this knowledge they had just developed. Instead of making medicine for people who needed it, they would instead go on to manufacture heavily addictive drugs and would begin setting up their drug running operation. This drug manufacturing was already helped thanks to the Great Khans' already vast knowledge of how to use plants and herbs, which would be able to turn them into mind-altering substances. Now with this basic science knowledge, they were able to make these drugs even more powerful and addictive, and because of it, within the Great Khan ranks, substance abuse was at an all-time high. But the Khans didn't just use the drugs for themselves, they would also keep some to sell onto other members of the Mojave, most significantly the fiends and West Side addicts, allowing them to gain access to supplies the tribe needed badly. Because of the teaching of the followers, it didn't take long before the Great Khans became the single most organized tribe in the wasteland and essentially ran the show. But this was to all change as the NCR showed up once again to try and take the significant landmark that was the Hoover Dam. With Mr. House now on the scene as well, he offered a solution and said that any tribe who swore utmost loyalty to Mr. House would be given instant access to weapons, ammunition, medicine, and other resources to allow him to fight back against the Great Khans, who had become too big of a burden for him and had declared war against anyone who wanted to challenge their rule. With this all on his side, House was able to get on his side the Mojave Boot Rider, the Mojave Cannibals, and the Slitherkin, and together as one, they were able to drive out the Great Khans from the northern Mojave and force them to relocate at a location known as Bitter Springs. Frustrated about their loss, Papa Khan and the rest of the raiders turned their attention to the old rivals from back in the day. Here they were going to attack the NCR, raiding their caravans, towns and camps, learning quickly that they were extremely easy targets as no one would hit them back. Because of this, the Khans continued doing this for years on end. That wasn't until the year of 2278, when the first Battle of Hoover Dam kicked off between the NCR and the new growing threat of Caesar's Legion. As the battle reached its end, the Legion were humiliated, with most of their important warriors being wiped out in the conflict. Not only did the Legion lose out massively, but the Brotherhood still were also driven away, meaning the NCR's rule on the land was run unopposed from any competition. Despite the NCR becoming a bigger threat for the Khans, they continued to conduct their raids, but not for long. During one raid, 4 NCR soldiers would be abducted and killed by the Great Khans, and now that this had been reported, the NCR knew they had to act and stamp out this tribe who would become a nuisance to their rule. It was time for the NCR to hit the Great Khans where it hurt, and with it, they launched the attack on their home of Bitter Springs. Bitter Springs was a disaster for the NCR though, and from the offset went badly. As the NCR troopers deployed into Bitter Springs, the attack force was spotted almost immediately and made contact with the Great Khan defenders. During this moment, 1st Recon troops heard an intense firefight taking place and immediately spotted Great Khan members traveling down from Canyon 37, the Red Pass, to the Khans. This group, however, was composed of women, children, as well as elderly and wounded members, not threats to them at all. Reporting what they could see back to High Command, the Rangers were ordered to just open fire on the individuals, and without hesitation, the sharpshooters obeyed the order and gunned down all of the vulnerable, unarmed civilians just looking to get to safety. After this event, many members of both the NCR and the Great Khans talk of the horrors of that day. One past child member of the Great Khans, now NCR member, Sergeant Bitterroot, stated that the Great Khans were the ones who incited it all, and they were just asking for it to happen at some point, stating he also did not view his past clan in a positive light, labeling them as scum and lazy, trumped-up raiders who attacked innocent settlers for fun and teaching their children how to kill NCR soldiers, personnel, and civilians. For other members of the Great Khans, however, the Bitter Springs massacre caused many of them to develop PTSD and did not want to talk about the events as it caused too much pain. Chance, for example, became a mute and abused drugs to cope with his constant flashbacks of the event. To many, this was just a way of NCR showing off their power and really highlighting how brutal they can really be, with Chance believing it was nothing to do with miscommunication. Instead, it was done without hesitation and was absolutely on purpose to make a statement. Not all of the Khan members were slaughtered in this battle, but most were picked up by the NCR and were resettled at Red Rock Canyon. Now here, the Khans did try and continue to create a source of income, and with that set up a drug lab within the desolate gorges. Years passed, and in 2281 their drug trade was finally making them a profit, and they now had their economy sorted, allowing them to have basic living necessities which they could not gather from the inhospitable canyon they now lived within. But now solely focused on this drug trade, any goodwill the Great Khans once had now completely gone, and the Khans now started making more drug trades to dozens of villages west of Vegas to avoid the NCR's clampdown on them. The NCR did, however, notice these drug trades and wanted to act on it. However, an assault on the Red Rock Canyon was far too expensive in terms of caps and men, and the land was far too harsh to camp out on. It wasn't worth it in the long run. But the Khans, however, did want to hit back, and because of that, the Khans launched guerrilla war tactics against the Republic, straining their overall supplies they needed for their rule over the land. The only real problem with the Great Khans' full focus on their drug trade did mean that a lot of their small settlements were filled with drug-addicted individuals, still hoping to forget the past events of the Bitter Springs massacre. Other areas influenced by these drugs were also falling into pieces, with many turning to junkie dens, with the Fiends being one of the tribes most affected. For the Great Khans, they continue to live, but their life is pretty poor. They have an extremely small civilization in a really uninhabitable area of the land. Their power on the land and the people is there to some extent, but it's not nearly what it once was, all thanks to the NCR once again. To many of the other tribes and factions of the world, the Khans' way of life is not worth it, and that is also reflected in their leader Papa Khan, who just wants more for his clan, desperate to leave behind a strong legacy. Luckily for the Khans, however, Caesar could see this, and with that sent out a high-ranking member of his society to act as an ambassador to the Khans under the guise of seeking a great warrior in exchange for promises of land, wealth, and ultimately revenge against the NCR to secure their allegiance. This proposal was accepted almost instantly thanks to Papa Khan and the rest of the Khans' utter hatred for the NCR because of what they had done to their society, and with it, the Khans were available whenever Caesar and his legion needed them. Karl was also able to appease Papa Khan and his advisors, stating that he would hold positions of power within the Legion. However, this was not going to actually happen for the Khans, as the Legion would not fulfill any of those promises given. In reality, Karl secretly hates the Great Khans, seeing them as unworthy of the Legion and subpar warriors. The only way to get the Great Khans to obey the Legion is by decimating them, otherwise they would just become a bother for the Legion. For the Khans, they have no choice in anything. They are a dying clan living in an inhospitable world. Their only chance of surviving is forming alliances, and with the NCR being their ultimate enemy, the Legion is their only hope. Without them, how else can they leave behind a legacy? With the Legion's help, maybe just maybe, Papa Khan and his tribe can become their elite warriors and can forge a new history with them. To outsiders of the clan, we all know that sadly for them, this will never happen, and more likely than not, the Great Khans will die out. However, their future relies on one person once again, that being the iconic courier brought back from the dead. With the courier's decision, the Great Khan's society could either thrive or it could fall once again. In the end, the Great Khans are just a shadow of what they once were, still a deadly faction but just desperate to live on and create new life where they could forge a true legacy for themselves. Every time they grow, however, they are always shut down. Maybe their only true hope is the downfall of all of the other big superpowers of Mr. House, the NCR and Caesar Legion. Only then might they thrive once again. But for now, the brutal faction known as the Great Khans lives out within the inhospitable land of the Red Rock Canyon, hoping that one day they can go back to being rulers of the land and the name can go down in history as the strongest in the whole of the wasteland. Down in the vault of Vault 34, the experiment that would be placed on the inhabitants here would consist of majorly overstocked gun cabinets filled to the brim of munitions. This ultimately turned the inhabitants into gun-obsessed individuals who prided themselves on their weapons, stating that it was their right to keep and bear them freely. When the 23rd century came about, this vault had a major population increase, and there needed to be something put into place to make sure it was fully controlled. With this, the Overseer introduced strict population control, and with it also completely sealed off the armory from the populace, making it so that it could only be opened through his terminal. Obviously, this would not go down well at all, as the population were under the belief that this was their biggest right. And when it was put into place, riots spread all over the vault as they desperately tried to grab as many guns as possible, and when they did, they all stormed the exit and left the vault in the year 2231. Now, having left their vault, this new society known to many around New Vegas as the Boomers would quickly dispatch all of the raiders they found thanks to their more powerful weaponry. However, despite the kill ratio being 43.6 raiders to 1 boomer, the rest of the society were extremely unhappy that they had lost people. That ratio was just not acceptable. Eventually, the boomers found themselves in the Nellis Air Force Base, a pre-war military installation that was endlessly hit with nuclear weapons, all thanks to Mr. House diverting all of the warheads away from New Vegas, firing them back to there. For years, this base was filled with radiation, making it unlivable. But thanks to time passing and the boomers being majorly equipped with Geiger counters, they would find that it was now in a livable condition, and with no one else in the nearby area, they were able to fully move into the base and restore it to full working order, making the most of the loads of space that they could use to store their arsenal. That said, the boomers weren't massively happy with how the base was. It had major security flaws that needed to be dealt with, and with that they would seek out ways to equip them with the heaviest pieces of firepower possible. With that plan, they set out into the wasteland and retrieved howitzers as well as the appropriate ammunition stockpiles that were located in a place called Area 2. The group on this search took a while to grab the stuff and return, however it was a success in the end, and once they did get back, that was the last time the boomers ever ventured out of the base. If they were under attack, they just fire their weapons from inside their facility and never met them out on the battlefield. And it worked wonders. The howitzers brutalized hundreds of people trying to get to them, regardless of if they were friendlies or enemies. Complete isolation for the rest of their lives wasn't their overall plan, however, and actually their goals shifted after seeing that there was a wreckage of a crashed B-29 bomber located in Lake Mead that was still pretty intact, and seeing that, they knew that this was now their destiny. With that in mind, the boomers all started to reactivate the VR simulators located in the facility to try and get everyone ready to pilot this plane. Originally, these VR simulators were created for this very such thing before the Great War, so they were in good hands and they were going to be very well prepared for when that day came. Inside their base isn't always safe. In fact, explosive ants were one of their biggest obstacles as they would take over the generator and ammunition bunker, and when the boomers went to go and deal with them, 2 of them would be killed and 3 would go on to be injured. The biggest problem holding them back, however, was that they are extremely xenophobic, and so any outsider who could possibly help them are not looked at favourably, apart from the courier, who is seen as being the decider of their fate by the boomer member known as the Mother Pearl, who believes she can see the future of this tribe. Despite their ant problem, they are extremely self-sufficient as they have their own crops in their thriving farms, and they have learned how to develop all of this over the many years they have been living here now. From the outside, they are seen as a real viable ally to have because of their firepower. Pretty much all of the other factions want them on their side. That includes the NCR, Legion, Mr. House, and all of the little ones as well. How could you say no to this group of maniacs with weapons who are also extremely skilled in farming, engineering, and have trained for all all situations. Also with a base that can be defended from attacks coming from miles away. Despite wanting the boomers' favour, no one has been able to get through to them because, once again, even if it's just a spokesperson for these factions, if they come close to their borders, they will be blasted by their artillery. Obviously, with the courier's help, this group of gun lovers will open their minds a bit more to outsiders and will be able to achieve their goals. However, it is unsure where they will now be after the Battle of Hoover Dam in 2281. They could be trading with the gun runners, they could have left the area for good, they could have even just stayed where they are and continued on for many years. It is unsure, but if they were to stay where they are, it's most likely they will continue to thrive in their little isolated world filled with guns, crops, and pre-war technology. And last, we have the final faction, if you can even call it a faction, and that is Yes Man, or the Independent New Vegas. Originally a generic Securitron robot that was just a general worker for Mr. House, the leader of the tribe known as the Chairman, a man named Benny, would go on to recover it after the Securitron had been heavily damaged by a pulse grenade. After this, Emily Orto of the Followers of the Apocalypse would go on to examine it, hoping to discover all of Mr. House's secrets, and after that would help Benny reprogram him for Benny's personal use. The reconstruction took a long while and it was intense until eventually Yes Man was created. The reason for why he was named Yes Man was simple. This new personalized Securitron would do exactly as he was told and would never be able to say no. He would always say yes to anything he was ordered to do. That meant if you were to encounter this Securitron, you could ask him anything and he would always have to answer. It would not be in his program to withhold information regardless of who wanted it. Benny's plan with Yes Man was to finally get rid of Mr. House and install Yes Man's AI onto the Lucky 38 mainframe, helping him take over all of New Vegas and the Securitrons roaming the area. Utilizing Yes Man, he would be able to grab every bit of vital information from House's databases, always stay one step ahead of Mr. House at all times, something that would massively frustrate Robert House. It was during all of this where Yes Man would discover all of Mr. House's plans for the Strip's defenses, and with it, plan to have a courier deliver a platinum chip to him that would upgrade all of them for good. Benny, witnessing this plan, knew he had to take action and got Yes Man to notify him of all of the routes, arrival and leaving times, as well as a potential ambush area where he could dispose of the courier and retrieve the platinum chip for himself. With that, Benny would seek out the help of the Great Khans and ultimately would go on to capture the courier, killing them and stealing the chip, jeopardizing all of Mr. House's plans, for now anyway. Eventually the courier, thanks to some amazing surgery by Dr. Henry, would recover and make it back to the Strip to come face to face with their killer to discover all of the secrets of Benny's plans and then gets to decide the fate of everything. If Yes Man were to succeed, he would take over all of Mr. House's Securitrons and upgrade them into MK2s, utilizing the software on the platinum chip. In the end, if this were to be the future of New Vegas, Yes Man would get the courier to attack both the NCR and the Legion, and with both of them being taken out by the Securitron forces, the courier and Yes Man would be able to bring about a truly independent New Vegas that was originally envisioned by Benny, where the courier would be able to decide everything that happens within, and the Mojave would be shaped into a new world. But is that really the best ending? Is it really capable of being able to survive like that? Maybe it is the best solution to all of New Vegas's problems, but where is the fun in not having all of these factions endlessly at war with one another? And would House really be able to fall that easily, or would he have another trick up his sleeve? Regardless, for me, the Wasteland would just not be that interesting without these factions. And with that said, these have been all of the major factions from Fallout New Vegas. I want to say a major thank you for watching this video. If you did make it this far, I've wanted to make this one for ages, so I'm glad it's finally made. If you did enjoy it, please do give it a like and subscribe and let me know which faction you'd align with personally. I want to say also a big thanks to my patrons for supporting the channel as always, including my small fishes, my YouTube channel Wise Ones, Video Gamer 75, Sith Lord 906, Planet Nanonterium, V3XXE and Ethan Feldman, my big fishes Dismind of Mine and Anthony Bonfiglio, my shark Dan F, my Megalodons Hazy Thoughts and Sinus, and my incredible starfish Nanohertz. But that is all for now. Thanks again for watching, and I shall see you all in the next one. Cheers.